this is a discussion about before, during, and after prison. But I think it's really important for people to get to know you. So, Palmer, I'm going to ask you, tell us a little bit about you, who you were before prison.
I really wasn't a bad student in school. I gravitated towards literature and arts, but I was fairly decent in all of my subjects up until the 5th grade. I started slacking. It wasn't that work wasn't hard. I just started slacking, like I wasn't studying as hard. And I went from being an A-B student to a C student at best. And my teachers, along with my parents, thought it was best that I repeat the 5th grade to close the gaps before moving on in 6th grade. And that really devastated me because now all the 4th graders were in 5th grade with me. And the 5th graders was in 6th grade laughing at me. So I stopped going to school. I started hanging in the streets on the block all day, every day, and at some point, I got addicted to drugs and violence. This was in 1977, I was 11 years old. When I was 12, someone shot me with a 12-gauge shotgun. When I was 14, I was sitting in DYS for murder. When I was 16, I was bound over as an adult. And when I was 17, I was serving a life sentence in Walpole. And so, there's no particular words for the crime that I committed, but a long list of behavior patterns brought me to that point. And somewhere in between trying to figure out who I was or wanted to be, I started aiming for the wrong star. I wanted to be respected in the streets because that's what it mattered to me at the time. So, to make a long story short, the crime revolved around me acting out the behavior of who I thought I wanted to be.
Middle school. Charles, thank you for that. Charles, I read a bit about this. I'm so pleased that there are so many talented writers and thinkers among us. And yours is this is really moving, short, direct, clear, plain, and simple. Love this. Talk about a bit more about your story, because I'm hearing some themes.
Yeah, I was also a good student. I was in advanced classes. I was an honor roll student until going into the 7th grade. My father left home. I was told I was the man of the house, and I didn't know what that meant.
7th grade.
7th grade. So then, the school I was going to go to, where my sisters went, burnt down. And then my parents just sent me to Woodrow Wilson. And it was a different environment. It was more about trying to survive the day. You know, you get on the bus and you go to the back of the bus because that's where all the cool people sit. And there'd be somebody on the bus with no jeans on, no sneakers, because somebody robbed them. So it became more about trying to survive that experience. And then, like Palmer said, you know, I started thinking about who did I want to be? Because now I'm the man of the house, there's not as much money going on. And my older cousins are in the streets, so I gravitated to them as a father figure. Which was tough because my father was a police officer for 35 years.
Mm-hmm.
So trying to hang with my cousins and learning what they had to learn because my father wasn't as present. And then I was still a smart kid. I picked up things very, very fast. So I picked up the street life very, very fast. And the people that was teaching me taught me that everything that happens, respond with violence. It's the quickest way to get to a plateau. Whether you're against somebody, friends, if you try to reason with somebody, you always gonna get the results that you want. But if you hit them in the head with a baseball bat, you're gonna automatically get
And you're in this. So.
And now you're in the life, and you have to do things. You have to suppress your conscience, your morals that your parents tried to teach you when you were young, because the only thing that you're dealing with is violence, violent people. And then, you know, I got into the drug trade, when I was 14. I went from 14 to 26, became successful at it.
Of course you did. Entrepreneurship.
Yes,
A lot of great skills.
yeah. Everything that you need in entrepreneurship, you can find it
Right.
in the drug trade. And then, my crime occurred, it was a cold case, and, I got picked up by the feds first. Guys in my neighborhood implicated me, and it was a crime that I didn't commit. But when you're in that life, it becomes easier for the prosecutors and them to throw you away, because they figure you're not gonna do anything with your life anyway.
Well, I want to get to that. Dre, I want to hear about you. So we've got a lot of stuff happening in middle school. Take us back to your before.
Hello. Good morning. My name is Ernest Appolon, but they call me Dre, which is like a nickname for me. Thank you guys for being here, and you two gentlemen, I'd like to take my hat off to you because you guys dealt with a lot of trauma, and I see you and hear you, and you guys deserve a lot of respect for overcoming what you did. For me, it was a totally different story. My parents immigrated from Haiti in '84 and '83, and they brought me over in '84. I've always had my father in my life, my mother in my life. I was really good at school. In fact, that's what brought me to Boston, was Boston Lion, and I ended up doing really well. And after high school, I had an identity crisis, so I went to college down south instead of going to like one of the more prestigious universities that accepted me. And after that, I came out. I have my son who's here, who's going into his junior year of college right now. I had him I graduated in that spring. He was born on my birth, like 2 days after my birthday, that November. And my mother was on her mission. She does a lot of, what do you call that? Those missionary people that goes overseas and stuff. My mother was doing that because I was raised in a financially stable family. My mother owned restaurants, properties. I can't ever say I was ever in your shoes, gentlemen, so I would never fake like I was. My parents were always doing good, and if they didn't do good, they never allowed me and my brothers to know that because they figured out a way to make it good. And my parents raised us always together, always go to church. Shoot, we went to church 4 or 5 times a week. So, it was a lot of church, it was a lot of other things. So I always had that support, and I never forget when my mother was in Bahamas doing missionary work, and my son was born, and she flew into Atlanta. I had my son in Atlanta because I went to college in Georgia, and she flew into the airport, and she's Haitian, so every culture has their way of doing their paternity tests or whatnot. So she did hers in the car, and after she did, she's like, "Oh no, that is your son. Do not play." And she looked at me, she said, "Hey, I'm about to get back on this plane. This is what's gonna happen. You're gonna take care of your blood because we don't let blood suffer in this country." And now she kissed me and said, "I love you," and then she got back on her plane and went about her business. Now I had to figure out how I'm gonna take care of this young gentleman that I had. So I set out on a plan, and my mother, I started working, but when you get a job out of college, you have a kid, the mother's used to a certain lifestyle and whatnot. So I had to figure something out. And in figuring that out, I got into real estate. And when I got into real estate, my first year, I was supposed to go to law school. So I was studying for my LSAT while I was working real estate. And I never forget the moment I sat down with my accountant to pay taxes. My first year I did 6 figures, low 6 figures. So then my second year, I almost hit 7 figures. And my father and me were so tight. He's transitioned to another existence now. And I never forget the accountant looked at me. He's an accountant out of Wellesley Hills. He said, "Ernst, I'm gonna tell you something. You keep stressing this law school stuff." He said, "Do you see these numbers right here? Not too many people make those numbers. So I would suggest to you have a gift. You have a gift. You understand, You understand the way the process works in business. So if you have that gift, use it, and keep using it to help yourself and your family. And he was like, you don't need law school. And after I did that, I sat down with my father. My father looked at it. It was his dream for me to become an attorney. And he looked at me, and I said, do I have your blessing not to go to law school? He looked at it, he said, well, yeah, you got my blessing. You know, and I never looked back. And then in 08, they asked me to go against one of my attorneys, which was my parents' attorney since I was a kid, to tell a story on him, which I knew nothing about, so I refused, and that's how I caught my charge. And I took him to trial thinking, the system works. Was I surprised, right? So my mother was there with me the whole time, and that's what it was before a job, you know? Thank you.
So different stories, you all end up there. Palmer, I want to go back to you. So you enter the system early. Talk about your mental state a bit and how you grew a bit going through that. When you first got there, give us your impressions, and then I want to hear about what did you do to find hope.
So, it's a two-pronged part to that. First, I have to acknowledge that I was in denial really about my crime. And I can explain it like this. I often wanted to believe that my crime was an accident because I knew in my heart I didn't arrive at any scene planning to kill anyone. In my mind, I thought that I could pull off one big bluff of violence and all the drugs on the block would be handed to me. I mean, I've seen it done that way so many times. I thought that was the way it would happen for me. But I knew, or I should have known, that because I was going somewhere to commit a bad act, that a bad act can happen, and a bad act did happen, and for that I'm responsible. And so now to answer your question, when I arrived at Walpole and made it.
How old again, Palmer? How old are you?
At this time, I'm 16 years old, going on 17.
Different
I
brain.
turned 17 in Walpole.
Okay.
But it made it possible for me to experience the fear that I put my victim through. When I got there, Walpole was moving faster than the world that I created in my own mind, which got me there in the first place. There was no feeling of being respected for what I had done. Just the reality that what I thought I was living for was really a myth, and that all of a sudden everything became real. The way Walpole ran was like a jungle. It was a place where all the bad guys I had ever heard about had all come together. I had no clout, no status, I was a nobody. And in the beginning, I never got a chance to think about what I had done because surviving alone was overwhelming. I allowed the situation of Walpole to manipulate me, leading me to believe that I had to renew my reputation in this new jungle or be counted out. Every day someone was being assaulted. Someone constantly setting the stage of who would run things into the next challenge. Meanwhile, new things were entering my life like race riots. Prior to Walpole, I've never experienced a race riot before, but all of this was being brought to me in a monstrous way.
That's a lot for a 16-year-old kid. Charles, you write about this in your book, about the code when you're walking in. Keep yourself, don't share, don't look up, don't know anyone. Talk a bit about how you transitioned in.
Well, when I went to prison, I was 26. I had been in the street for a while, and I had never been in jail before. Before I got my charge, I had never been in jail for more than 3 hours. Because, I had enough money to pay people as soon as I got arrested. Sometimes I was out at the police station before the cops came back on the beat. And I felt that was always going to be my experience. I equated money with you can do anything you want. But when, like Palmer said, when you get to prison, prison is real. There's no, I just happened to be in the street long enough that I knew a lot of people when I got there. So a lot of people, coming in and out of prison when I was on the street, you hear about different people, you hear about the stories of what you're supposed to do and what you're not supposed to do. But when I got there, there was, older dudes from my neighborhood that was already there, that knew me from the street, And I was always somebody that, I was always mild and I didn't want to, I wasn't a bully, I wasn't a troublemaker. But if somebody pushed me, I would take it farther than they thought I was gonna take it. And it was based on my fear. Because I was like, if I don't show everybody that this is not, I'm not gonna be a victim, then they make you a victim. So when you get to prison, it's like, I knew so many people, and I was like, you get there and you're like, oh, this is where this dude's been for the last 10 years, when I haven't seen him. So it was more like a elementary school, middle school, high school reunion. But with a different level of seriousness. Like, again, violence in prison solves a lot. If you cut somebody in line, you're gonna get your head smashed. If you sit at the wrong table, something can happen to you. So there's rules that are implemented by the inmates amongst each other that you try to just get through every day, mind your business. My thing was, I don't gamble, I don't do drugs, I don't drink.
And you talk about that in here.
Yes.
It's part of a way of keeping yourself safe.
Keep yourself out of situations, because when you're in the street, you can kind of see stuff about to happen. If you owe somebody, and most things I've seen that happen is somebody owes somebody in prison because your family told you that they were going to send you money at a particular time. But you don't realize a lot of times that your family is outside living life. So if they were going to send you some money, but then their car got towed, they had to pay $200 to get the car out, so now they can't send you no money. But you can't go to the guy that you owe and say, I don't have that money. Because now he's like, oh, now you're faking. So now something can happen. So I always kept my mind on, if you don't put yourself in situations, then things don't happen.
So it's a different mindset when you walk in. Ernst, how about for you? With the jungle, it's a very different community with pretty severe rules. What was it like for you?
Well, for me, I was in the Feds, so it was a little bit different. When I got there, they put us in county with the guys who were the murderers, the killers, whatever. And it's funny because when I walked in there, I had 4 guys whose mothers were my tenants. So they kind of knew me. So they treated me like the money. And in prison, if you're known as the money, everybody try to do favors for you. Everybody try to do nice things to stay in your good grace, because they know, like, if they have a problem, you can help them out or whatnot. So that was kind of good, but then, I'm 20, 28, 29, 27. No, 08, I was 28. Sorry, it's my mother, that's like my right hand.
Thank you, Mom.
So you gotta remember, I've never had a situation quite similar to that because I was married, I had a successful business, and I had passive income. I was living the American dream, be real. And it was like a surreal dream that was happening. You ever read a book and the movie's playing in your head while you're reading the book, and everything, the words of the author is jumping out and formulating images in your head, but it's like you're not there, but you feel as if though you're there because the words are so vivid and the picture is so vivid in your head. I felt like that's what I was going through at that moment. And then there were people who antagonized me You know, oh, you really got that money? Put $1,000 on my books. Or then there was a guys who came over like, oh, he's not no street dude, but he's black. Hey, run his pockets, or you know, try to. But the thing was, I didn't need to interact with them, so a lot of situations I avoided because one, I didn't need to interact with them because my mind was getting home. From the moment I got in there, my whole concept was I gotta get home. I had my son whose graduation was coming up, and I was telling the attorney, hey man, whatever you gotta put up, do it. I promised him I'm gonna be at his graduation. I have to be there. And it never involved like me getting involved with them. So every time they try to give a little push or try to sucker me or whatever, this is in county. I never went for it, locked my door, whatever I had to do. When I got to prison, I was in Club Fed. Like, I'm not gonna say, oh, I was there with like the mob, like everybody that was head of an indictment that you've seen on the news, I was there with them. You know, and the worst thing that could happen was a race riot. And I was there, I spoke Spanish, I spoke English, I spoke Creole. So I could basically maneuver through everybody because I could communicate. Communication rules the nation. So I was really I wasn't really in a bad predicament to where I felt endangered, you know, but I felt danger was there. But I stayed away like, okay, I'm to myself.
So definitely a different place. Charles, when you got there, and I want to hear from Palmer too, what was your innate coping mechanism? Was it your faith? Was it working out? What was it? This is a stressful place. What, in terms of to keep yourself on a level plane mentally, what was it?
It was definitely my faith. I went to vacation Bible school and stuff like that with my mom when I was younger. So I went back to that because I was trying to figure out what happened to me. How did I allow myself to be manipulated into this life that meant so much to me? And I just tried to, you know, I went to a lot of programs. I started running programs. I did a lot of writing. I got into the law library. Started trying to figure out what happened to me.
Yeah, you immersed yourself in that library.
Yeah, I was in the law library at least 4 times a week, you know, working out and just trying to figure out what happened. And, you know, keeping my faith. You know, I'd call home like probably every 10 days, and my mother would just be like, oh, y'all, I'm just praying for you know, stuff like that. So I just kept my faith strong.
What did your faith look like in prison? Was it organized? Was it you? Was it how did your faith work while you're sitting there?
Yeah, I prayed every night. I'm a Christian, so I prayed every night, and I just realized that, you know, that I'm more than what they tried to make me out to be. And then when I took stock in myself and how much power I had, that I had amassed in the street, and I started thinking, what if I just did that in a positive way? So I started, like, you know, I would write motions and stuff for guys. I would teach guys how to read. You know, I just immersed myself into a teacher role, and, you know, anybody that came to me for help, you know, I would try to help them as best I could. But, you know, if somebody was like, you know, pushing a little bit too much, I'd be like, yo, spread your hustle.
Yes.
You know, because I don't mind giving somebody something, but sometimes when people aren't used to you being nice to them, they try to take advantage of it. The world is filled with givers and it's filled with takers. So you have to be able to give, but realize when somebody is a full-time taker.
If Christianity was easy, everybody would be doing it flawlessly.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
That's the core. Palmer, what was it like for you? You're a terrified kid. Mentally, what did you do? How did you get through that first bit of time?
Well, at first I tried to go to all the programs. They was ran by mostly the prisoners. It was like a small resort that best served those in the group, so to speak. Nevertheless, I went to many of them, but not really learning anything because there was no paying attention factor. Had it been, perhaps I would not have pretended for years that I could read or write when I couldn't. I learned how to read by way of a good friend who's here today, Mr. Raymond Gaines. who not only taught me how to read, but in time, he made it possible for me to realize that not only was I in prison, but I was there for the taking of someone's life. So I had to work very hard to change my life. The best way I can answer your question is to say that not being able to read fluently closed a lot of doors for me, but opened that many more setbacks. But after I learned how to read, it became even more difficult. You got to remember, I'm growing up in prison. I'm a 17-year-old kid faced with the events of adulthood in prison. And I wasn't learning how to grow up. I was forced to grow up, and that took a long time.
Yeah.
But what helped me was being taught by the system. It's like someone recording your life. It's very slick when someone records your life, even if it's the wrong record being made. Just imagine that you're out here, and no matter where you are, you always have some type of standard to live up to. But if you're not careful, those standards can be created for you. The same thing started to happen with me when the caseworker would sit across from me and smile and say things like, wow, you're a very serious guy. And then I have a big brown folder building up this whole new reputation about me that as soon as I hear it, I know it's a bit lit, twisted in the wrong light. Yet the caseworkers are like small grapevines themselves. They, for whatever reason, are reporting to all the other staff who share with all the other prisoners unknown to you what you're about. It was times when I wanted to say to them, that's not what I did. That report didn't happen like that. And by the way, that fight wasn't because I was a tough kid. It was because I was afraid and felt like I had to do something. But by the time I realized that I didn't like what was being said about me, by the time I grew up in a place that was meant to stop my growth, I was stuck with what lied inside of those big brown folders. It got so beyond me that I couldn't even know things about myself. I couldn't get a copy of what was in them files without filing a long list of query forms to be approved. Only then did I realize that something was wrong. At that moment, I realized that DOC stopped recording me as being a person, and I became what was on paper.
You're a number. Palmer, what did you, when you first learned to read, what was your favorite thing to read?
Well, I've always been a student of metaphysics. And so I would read a lot of books that was abstract. You can learn, if you read the same book that I read, we would both get something different from it. It was an indirect conversation. And I learned how to think outside of the box, right? And I learned a lot of spirituality stuff when I started, just being in space. And, reading about stars and, clouds and cumulus clouds and, things like that. It just opened up a whole new horizon for me. And I never really, the best book that I ever remember reading was Ernest Holmes. And the name of the book is The Science of the Mind. And again, it was metaphysics.
So intellectual curiosity helped with that sort of mental health. You mentioned some programs, Palmer. I want to ask all three of you, what are the kind of things, just from your mental state, what are the kind of things that, programs, and things that maybe the prison did, I'm going to ask you plenty about this, but did they do anything well in terms of programs? Was there anything worthwhile that you looked forward to while you were there?
Not for me. So when I tried to go to some of the programs, they had
Now, what were some of them, Palmer? What were they like?
all of them: anger management, emotional awareness, alternative to violence. And I'll give you an example. In one of these programs, anger management, there was a student from Emerson College, and I kind of got offended because I realized that she didn't understand what anger was. She was up there trying to get a grade, like it was a part of her hands-on, part of her curriculum for her to pass her grade. And so I was frustrated, because I really needed help at this time. I was a lost kid, it's one thing when you have life, it's another thing when someone take it from you.
That's right.
A sidewalk is different for me. Grass, a leaf on a tree, that's different for me. You know, I seen it and then it was taken from me. I did 27 and a half years straight. And I'm lucky to be out through God's mercy.
That's right.
I had a slew of people in the community help me get out. Right out, I wasn't supposed to get out, and I was being bad in the prison, catching cases and stuff like that. And so, to go back to your question, I'm sorry for digressing.
No, you're answering it.
But to go back to your question, I asked this lady who was teaching this anger management class what was anger, and she couldn't explain to me. She said it was a feeling, and I said, what's the feeling? And she said it was an emotion, and I said, what's the emotion? And she couldn't describe to me what anger was at its lowest denominator. And so she tried to really reverse psychology and said, you tell me what anger is. And I said, anger is an indicator letting you know that something bad happened to you. And so the message behind that is anger is never the problem. It's your response to anger. So you can get angry, you can study for a test and really hard and not pass the test and get angry, but that could be a motivator for you to study harder and pass the test. So when I realized that it was all right to feel what I was feeling, but I had to learn how to respond to it.
And you're that much older. Were there any programs, Charles, that you took advantage of, whether they were mental health or other programs in the prison?
Yeah, the two that stood out for me was one called Men's Work. It was taught by a guy who was sort of a hippie type guy, this guy named Blaze.
And what was it?
And what he did was he had us go back to our childhood, and he said, what was the biggest trauma that you suffered in your childhood? And, you know, they went around the class, and he said, because mine was 9 when my father left. And he said, write a letter to your 9-year-old self, what you would want to tell him, or what you wished your father would have said to him. And that was liberating.
Yes, cathartic.
And then he said, well, write a letter to your father, telling him what you wish he would have did, but don't send it, just to get those feelings out. And that one was good. And another one was Father's Group. They call it Young Fathers Group. It's Father's Group, because I had a son. When I went to prison, my son was 5, and I was a single parent. You know, his mother was there, but we broke up, and I wanted my son to be with me. And then, unknowingly, I did the same thing to my son that my father did. So I had to deal with that. And,
So you had these programs, at least these programs.
yeah, and it taught me how to be a better father. It taught me how to deal with my emotions. Because when you're inside and you have a child and you're not with the child's mother, it becomes difficult for the communication, because, you know, you're gonna call at a particular time, you set that up, but you're still learning that life on the outside doesn't happen. Like, when you're inside, everything is regimented. You know you're gonna eat at this time, you know you're gonna lights out at this time, you know everything is structured. But life on the outside isn't structured. So if I was supposed to call at 7, and I call, and nobody picks up the phone, now I'm pissed, because I'm like, you know that I'm gonna call at 7. And learning how to not verbally lash out when you feel disappointed.
Thank you, Justin. Ernst, what did you do when you were in any kind of programs that you found useful, helpful?
Well, to be honest, when I got there, they made me a tutor for people who were trying to pass their GED, and I worked in the library, and I did a lot of running. When I say a lot of running, like every day, I'd get up, I'd run for at least 40 minutes, at least, because, you know, I played sports all my life, so That was my kind of ability to cope with things. I grew up in a religious household, but I was always more of a critical thinker. Programs when I got to prison, I'm not even gonna lie to you, Dr. Man. I looked at it, I said, I don't wanna deal. Because like they said, like, you know, I'm analytical in a way. If I look at something and I see it doesn't make sense, or I don't see the energy, the right intentions are behind it, I just don't want to do it because it's a recipe for chaos at some point. Especially when you're there with a bunch of individuals. There was one particular guy, his name was Hassim. He was my first student in tutoring for GED. Big guy from Philly. And he was the head of the Muslim Card, which is like a gang, and like they call it a gang, but it's a religious organization for men who follow Islam. But they call it a gang because they roll together, they do whatever they want to do together. And I remember I was helping him with like his GED. This is like his 5th time trying to take it to pass it. And in the feds, if you do not have your GED or your high school diploma, you have to keep going until you get it. They will not allow you. They'll put you in segregation if you don't go and get it. So I remember teaching them something. I was teaching them the multiplication table, and I remember this method that my mom taught me. And I remember my dad tried to teach it to me, and he couldn't. And my father believes in corporal punishment, like he'll hit you and hit you and hit you. So I remember what my mom did, and I tried to use it with him, and he said, "Young blood, how old are you?" I said, "I'm 30. He goes, "Well, you know, I'm 50-something years old, man." And he started telling me about his life. I was like, "Yeah, that sounds good, but listen, I gotta help you pass this. So pay attention to what I'm saying to you." "Oh, you really think you can tell me this?" I said, No. They asked me to help you, and I'm gonna help you. Then I found out he didn't know how to read. So that was another barrier that caused his frustration, his anger, and he focused all that on me to blow it all out, and he didn't know how to do it properly. And I realized as I'm looking at him, and he's talking that gangster talk, and he thinking he's intimidating me, and I'm looking at him, and I'm like, oh, okay, I shouldn't even be here. I shouldn't be here. That's God. Well, I'm not religious. I'm like, that's my message that I shouldn't even be here dealing with this stuff. Because I gotta find those who want help, not those who they just give me to help out. You gotta want the help first. So after that day, I kept it cool, whatever, after that day, and never again. I told the people at the tutoring place, look, I understand this to help people, but this ain't for me. Because my communication skills are not good enough to get the message across to these people. And it'll be wasting their time and my time. And that's what I did. I kept my mind into, you guys ever heard of Friedrich Nietzsche?
Sure.
He's a philosopher.
So
I
great
love
philosopher.
him. So I just read a lot of books about him that he's written. I read so much about Nietzsche, Descartes. Those were where I kept my mind. Those were the places I kept my mind. And I did some metaphysical studies and stuff. That's where I kept my mind. And I studied Johnny Diamond. I don't know if you guys know him. Okay, he's the head of Chase, Citibank.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I studied a lot of his
Yeah.
moves because I said, I used to always say, like, look, I'm gonna be at that level to where he knows who I am, and he calls me, so we'll be in the same network. That was my guy.
All right.
I love him.
All right, so you're still working on it. I want to talk about after prison. We talked about before, during, and after. Palmer, what's it like being back? And the greatest, unfair question, but I got to ask it anyway in the interest of time. Tell me about the greatest challenge about being home. First.
I got you. So, first I want to acknowledge some people. My mom, my wife, Kathy, Senator Diane Wilkerson, State Rep Gloria Fox, City Council Chuck Turner, City Council Felix Arroyo, Professor Bill Owens, Brother Gregory Davis, Miss Eva Clark, I want to really thank them for their divine intervention in helping me get a second chance in life outside of prison. I feel that my history and institutional growth can serve as a great asset to those transitioning into the community. Since my release in 2007, I've experienced firsthand some of the challenges faced when reintegrating into society following incarceration. In recognizing those hurdles, I, along with my great friend, best friend, brother, and business partner, Mr. Jonathan Kirkland, sitting right here, we established 1555 Destiny Design. It's a company whose mission is to really take on two critical areas of needs: employment and housing. And through a holistic and comprehensive approach, we are both committed and dedicated to breaking the cycle of recidivism by offering our support to those on the path towards rehabilitation.
Palmer, how can they get in touch with you? Website, easiest way? How do they get in touch with you?
Website, but the easiest way is through my phone, my cell phone. At 617-763-2551.
And it's 1555 Destiny Design.
And
what's the 1555?
Okay, so this is this is all strategic. 1555. So when we was taken from Africa and brought over here as slaves, in 1555, John Hawkins, who was a pirate, hijacked the ship that we was on. And the name of the ship was called the Good Ship Jesus. And we was brought over here to the Maracacas and his Isles. And so today we have the ability to design our own destiny, hence 1555 Destiny Design.
Every entrepreneur's got a great story behind their name. I'm so glad that's yours. That's terrific. Charles, tell us a bit more about you after you're home.
When I was leaving prison, my reentry counselor told me to just get a job at a fast food place or a car wash, keep my head down and stay out of trouble. And I was like, she doesn't know that.
She know you're a writer? She know you're a thinker?
No, she didn't know that, but she didn't know I made thousands of dollars every week. So I'm not gonna come out here and, make $9 an hour because I wouldn't be happy. So I came home. When I was in prison, I did a lot of reading on real estate because I love money. Money is access. It's not just power, it's access. So I was like, I have to study, how do I get the money that I was accustomed to, but then they don't come and take it all away if you get caught up. So I learned that, I learned communication, and when I left, I went to the halfway house, and because the parole board said they wanted me to see what drugs did to my community. And I told them I didn't want to go because I already knew what it did. But I was in there, and these guys came in, and they had to go to detox for 3 days. And then they came back, and they said, okay, if anybody has to go to work, you can leave. So these guys was just told us that they were sleeping in Boston Common, got up and left. So I was like, what job they got? So when they came back, I asked them, and they said that they were carpenters. And I said, how much do you make? At the time, I was working at Appolon as the lead cook. And they said, well, we made $34 an hour. So I said, okay, how do I do that? So I went down there, make a long story short. I got into what they call the mill rights, it's local 1121. And now I build and maintain power plants.
Woo! That's good. That's good.
It was upsetting to me that when I came home, none of my friends who had been out there for 17 years could get me a job.
Yeah.
So I've been doing the union thing for 9 years. I've been a foreman on some big projects, like, multiple $100 million projects. And now I reached a status in the union where I can say, I want this guy in. Wow. It's been tough because a lot of guys, you have to deal with a lot of jealousy because, they weren't as focused. So when you come home and you're like laser focused, because like Tommy said, everything out here, you're like, they actually gave me another chance.
Yeah.
So a lot of guys get jealous, but I still, if guys come to me, I tell them, if you can clean a shower in the joint for $1 a day, you can go make this $100 a day on Saturday, $100 an hour. You just gotta be able to pass a drug test and have a driver's license. And
And an imagination.
yes,
You
and
gotta have
I've been able to put on at least 4 people, but I've also had failures because people can't pass the drug test. People don't want to stop smoking weed. So then, all I can tell them, all I'm gonna do is give you an opportunity. You have to walk through the door.
Great story. First, when you were out, I know, because we met in part, once you were out, but talk about what happened when you were out.
When I was out, before I even came home, I'm not even gonna lie to you, I already had my plan. I said, look, I'm not gonna, there's a statement that goes, if you plan to fail, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. So I'm really strategic in everything that I do and everything that I get involved with. So I already had a plan when I came home. I had a plan to start in the healthcare business. And when I told my mother, I never forget, I was telling my mother, because my mom's my bouncing boy. I bounce ideas off of her. My mother's like my right hand, like Bonnie and Clyde. Like people, I've never had good luck with women. So the woman that's always been true to me has been my grandmother and my mother. So what I do is I'm sitting in the house every day telling my mom, yeah, Mom, we're gonna do this, we're gonna do that, da 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 da. And she's like, oh, baby, okay, baby.
That's what mothers do.
That's what
You do you.
And the crazy thing is, my mother, like, it's something about a mother's push in a man that I see it and I've always had a respect for it. Because my mother, I'll tell her I'm about to do this and then she'll push me out there and be like, yeah, what did you say again? And I have to man up and figure it out. And my father, he'd be like, oh, baby, but then he'll be like, nah, let him go. And she'll be like that wind to my sail, if that makes sense. Like at the moments that I feel like, oh man, this is getting kind of tough. So I went for a job interview. Well, my PO, I told my PO, look, I'm about to start a company. She said, boy, you went to jail for business, man. I do not want to hear this. I'm like, come on. She's like, you better go get you a job. I said, work for who? I was like, at 24 years old, I had $1 million. You really think I'm gonna go work with somebody? That's right. Are you out your mind, lady? And she's like, well, I got these handcuffs right now that's telling me. I was like, well, you're right. So, that changes the dynamics of the relationship. So now I go and I look, and I start doing Uber, but at the same time, I'm waiting for my probation to be finished. As soon as it's about to finish, they call me. My PO sends me to MIT, and they have this incubator, and they're hiring people to collect, what do you call that? To collect trash, right? Our job was, at the incubator, they sent me to this place in Dorchester. They said, this company just got $20 million funding to collect trash from different grocery shops, different businesses and organizations. For what, I don't know, but whatever they were collecting it for, they'd bring it back to MIT, and MIT would analyze the trash and then other stuff like that. And I looked at the lady, I said, hey, I'm good at sales, right? She says, no, I don't know anything, but I can give you a job for $22 an hour, take it or leave it. And she said, I said, well, you know what? I know what it brings when you bring in contracts, so I want a piece of the contract. She called somebody else. When she seen me walk out, she called me back. Oh no, somebody told me you was a great salesperson. Come back. We'll discuss a commission-based situation. I was like, all right. And then one of the ladies heard me talk. She said, you know what? I'm gonna send you to this program at BC. And that's when I met Dr. Denary, and I started developing my ideas. He said, put it on paper, do this, do that, do that. And I was like, okay, cool, I'll do it. And I
Always
started
homework.
pitching.
It's always homework.
Yes, and I don't mind, and I started pitching my idea. At the final speech, one of the Boston College alum said, look, I have this transportation detail that I need supply. And he was like, you have to bring kids from a halfway house to court, so they can go get tested and this and that. I was like, well, I could do that, no problem. And from there, and taking my son to these nursing homes, these different facilities, pitching, hey, I have this transportation come out, man, that's how I got my start. I never looked back. Look, now we employ 30 people, I have 22 vans, first one, I get it.